Yes, it's about time. Good afternoon, everyone. Before else, let me explain my presence here instead of Sister Helen Alford, the Dean of the department. Unfortunately, Sister Helen cannot be with us today. Her mom has just passed away, so she needed to be with her. Therefore, I asked you to unite with her family in prayers. Our thoughts and prayers are with her and her family. Therefore, it's me that, on behalf of the Department of the Faculty of Department of Social Sciences, I would like to welcome all of you to the conference, Putting Catholic Social Teaching into Practice. Can we measure how well we are doing? We already have a hypothesis to prove what I believe our distinguished speakers will do. First of all, I would like to welcome our distinguished speakers. Dr. Sabina Alkire. I will make short introductions to each of you before your presentations. We also have today with us Father Albino Barrera and Dr. Stefano Menghinello. Welcome. Welcome to you, and thank you for your presence with us. And of course, I'd like to welcome all the guests and present here for the conference. It was supposedly Albert Einstein, that said, "Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." So we have those two phrases. If it isn't counted, it doesn't count, and the things that really count can't be counted. I believe our presence here, our endeavor in this conference, is to find the right balance between those two phrases that are a starting point for our conference that we see as a platform for scholars, for practitioners to delve into those dimensions of Catholic social teaching and explore ways and innovative methodologies for its measurement, to find the right measurements. I believe your presence here reflects this shared commitment to advance our understanding of the principles of Catholic social teachings and the way to put them into practice, to measure all the efforts that we do with developing the principles and putting them into practice. Therefore, I would like to invite you to engage in this meaningful dialogue, exchange of ideas, and inspiring one another as we navigate those complexity of and challenge of measuring the impact and effectiveness of Catholic social teaching. Thank you for joining us to this conference, and without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Albino Barrera to give his presentation. He is the professor of economics and theology at Providence College in Rhode Island, USA. He has, in his research, in his teaching, he has explored how economics and moral theology can mutually reinforce each other in facilitating human flourishing. So, thank you, Professor Barrera, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Piotr.
Let me just...
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Of course, we say it's Catholic social thought, but also please be aware that it could also be Christian social thought, because practically 95% of the mainstream Reformation traditions also subscribe to many of the principles and premises of Catholic social thought. So this is not merely Catholic social thought, it's actually much broader in terms of what it is able to cover. I'd like to begin by noting that there is one deficiency when it comes to Christian social thought, and that is the lack of measurement. And the lack of measurement, however, also is the promise that opens up for further development. So this is one area where further development and growth can still happen, precisely because of the lack of such measurements. This is the chance, this is the opportunity to do it. So for those of you who are looking for dissertation topics or paper topics, this might actually open up ideas. So what I am going to do is not an exhaustive presentation of the case for why there is need for metrics in Catholic social thought. I couldn't do that within the time frame available. So I will only pick out and highlight those areas, and you could add more arguments as you please. So this is not an exhaustive presentation. Let me just present the case, 6 to 7 arguments on why there is need for metrics for Catholic social thought. The first is that we should understand that Catholic social thought is embedded within a larger divine order of creation. It does not arise in a vacuum. Catholic social thought does not arise in a vacuum. That is actually within the context of a divine order of creation. And within the divine order of creation, it is within a trajectory of creation, sin, and redemption. So this is something that we study in theology itself. It's that trajectory, creation, sin, redemption. And we see the development of different types of theology within that trajectory. Catholic social thought is not exempt from that. So let me present the implications of being embedded within a divine order of creation. I will refer to metaphysics, and then I will also look at scripture, just to make the point for the need for metrics. Let me begin with metaphysics. Now, I am not presupposing that everybody has a background in metaphysics, so don't worry about it, and I'll try to make it as accessible as possible. So if we were to begin with St. Thomas Aquinas, and so you and I know that we cannot guarantee our own existence. We had nothing to do with our being created, with our existence. We have no control over that. So but we nevertheless exist, right? So those two things. It's not in our nature to exist. Can't really control our existence, but at the same time, we know that we exist. From this, we can already conclude, it's not even an inference, we can conclude that, this must be a borrowed existence. It is a conferred existence. It is a created existence. And so, in this case, as part of a created existence, we essentially are reflecting the goodness, the perfections of the being whose existence we are borrowing. So we're merely in borrowed existence. We're merely participating in the existence of a necessary being. And as part of our existence, we reflect the perfections, the perfection, the goodness of that necessary being according to our mode of being and operation. According to our being, mode of our being and operation. So let me be specific with respect to human beings. Human beings, our mode of being and operation, it's essentially our moral faculties. And we are distinctive in that our mode of being and operation should actually lead toward moral excellence. Toward moral excellence. So in St. Thomas's ontology, not only are we supposed to be reflecting the goodness of God that we embody according to our mode of being and operation, but in addition to that, there is something else. There's a second gift. And the second gift here is that when we reflect God's perfections according to our mode of being and operation, we also assist other creatures, including fellow human beings, also in their own turn reflect in their own turn their share of God's goodness that they embody according to their mode of being and operation. So there are two gifts involved. The first is that, hey, you know what? This existence and our ability to act allow us to reflect the perfections of God. Gift number one. Gift number two is that we can actually affect others in their own reflection, in their own turn, for good or for bad. So we can actually impede them because of our sinfulness, or we can assist them, facilitate their own reflection of God's perfections. Okay? So in other words, God works through nature. God works through nature. Good grief, God is providing for us through each other. That, in effect, is the implication. It is God working, providing for us through each other. Now, please understand that we do not subscribe to what is called occasionalism. Occasionalism. We do not subscribe to that. Occasionalism is the thought that says that it is God who acts directly on all effects that we see in the world around us. That God is the one really directly making these effects come out. That is occasionalism. And Catholic theology does not subscribe to that because we believe in a real, efficient causality for human beings. That our efficient causality is real. But, of course, we say that this is an efficient causality that is not really ours, that is also participated. In the same way that our existence is a participation in the existence of the necessary being, God, our efficient causality is also a participated causality. We're participating in the efficient causality of God. Critical thing here is that our efficient causality is real. There's a real impact there. So that would be in a gist, in a thumbnail sketch of how to make the case for Catholic social thought within Thomistic ontology and the need for metrics. Because how do we know whether or not we're impeding others in reflecting God's goodness? How do we know that? Unless we measure it. How do we know how well we, in our own turn, are also reflecting the perfections of God if we do not measure it? So we can't really leave it at an abstract claim, an abstract level. And so this is where we really have to step forward and move this a step further by having metrics for all these claims, for all these obligations that we have. Okay? So that would be using metaphysics to describe this order, the divine order of creation. Let me now move to sacred scripture, just to show you how sacred scripture also comes to the same implication. Let me pick out Paul. St. Paul, I think, is a very good choice, because you and I know that what is significant about the claim of St. Paul, having just celebrated Easter, is that you and I are now new creatures. The death, the resurrection, the passion, death, resurrection of Jesus Christ simply inaugurated the new creation, new creatures. So this is something that you see in Paul repeatedly. Our justification because of what Jesus Christ did, and then our holiness, our perfection as well. You see all of that in St. Paul. But then there is something you will notice in the letters of St. Paul, in the letters that are genuinely ascribed to St. Paul. He is very concrete in his paranesis. He is very concrete in the ethical implications of what it is to be a new creature. He does not leave it at the level of abstraction, but he's very, very precise. Because observe that his letters were actually a response to real problems in his community, which is why he is also very concrete in his ethical teachings. So in being so concrete with respect to what is expected for the ethical implications of being a new creation, that in itself also requires metrics. Because otherwise, how well do you know? How well do you know whether you're living up to what is required by the new creation? So there is one very good, if I recall right, this is from Furnish, the theologian Furnish from the 1960s. To describe Paul, there is what he calls the indicative and the imperative. The indicative and the imperative. He makes that distinction. The indicative is descriptive of who we have become. Okay, so that is what he calls the indicative. It is descriptive of who we have become on account of what Jesus Christ was able to accomplish. That's the indicative, describing as to who we are. That indicative right there necessarily leads to its mirror image, which is the imperative. The imperative necessarily follows from the indicative. The imperative merely says, be all you who, be everything you have become. Be all you can be. In other words, borrowing from the ad of the U.S. Army. There was a U.S. Army ad about 20 years ago. Whoever did it was really very good. And the song and the lyrics is be all you can be. Join the army. Well, that is what the imperative is all about. Be all you can be in what Jesus Christ has been able to accomplish for you. That is why it's the indicative and the imperative. A very good way of remembering the implications of what it is to be a new creation. How well do we know if we are living up to that imperative? Are we moving in the right direction? Are we making any progress? Well, unless you measure, unless there is a way of measuring, you will not be in a position to gauge and evaluate whether or not you're living up to that imperative. Okay? So that is the first case that I would like to make. It's discerning God's order of creation. In God's order of creation, we want to see what the objective requirements are in God's order of creation. How well we're living up to God's order of creation. All of these will require concrete measurement. They require concrete specification, and then after that, it would be some measurement. So, what the case for metrics, for Catholic social teachings? What it is not. It is not about measuring the transcendent. That is arrogant. That's presumptuous to think that we can measure the transcendent. Instead, it is essentially measuring how well we are able to live up to that imperative that comes with the indicative. Okay, so that is what metrics for Catholic social teaching is all about. It's not about measuring the transcendent. It is about measuring the impact of our appropriation, the implications of that transcendent in our earthly lives, the indicative and the imperative. That is just a sampling from St. Paul. I'm sure if you look at other areas of theology, you would be able to arrive at the same case on the need for metrics. So let me move on to a second argument as to why there is need for metrics. You see, Catholic social thought, Christian social thought, one of the goals is human flourishing. That's the whole point in terms of human flourishing, to flourish in human life. Now, regardless of the author that you read on what constitutes human flourishing, so there are different versions of what will constitute human flourishing. Finnis, Nussbaum, Eckstein and Nussbaum, they would also have the list of what are critical, and there are many other lists as well. One common feature of all these lists when it comes to what does it mean to flourish in concrete terms is that there is an unavoidable economic dimension. This should not be a surprise. Why? Because there is a constitutive economic dimension in human life. There's a constitutive economic dimension in human life. Well, we're corporeal. We're corporeal. And as bodies, and even as souls, we need material inputs. So off the bat, you require reliance on the use of the gifts of the earth. And then on top of that, another area where we have an economic dimension here, unavoidable economic dimension, is that we share a common earth. And this is an earth that is finite in its resources, and our wants are unlimited. And so you can see the implications here. Like it or not, we have to allocate amongst ourselves. And so that in itself, economics is essentially about allocation. Economics is allocation of scarce resources to their best uses. And I leave it up to you, how you would define best. What are the criteria to be used for best? But the important thing is that really economics is concerned with allocation. So this is a second case right here. If you're talking of human flourishing, like it or not, there's a constituent economic dimension in that. And once you bring in that economic dimension, you simply have to bring in metrics. Let me bring a third argument as to why there is need for metrics. Catholic social thought is clearly, it's about teaching. Teaching about who we are in terms of our anthropology and about cosmology. Sure, it's about teaching. Now, there is a big difference between teaching and governance. There's a big difference between teaching and governance. Catholic social thought, and the same thing is true for the other mainstream traditions, they can talk of the most lofty principles. And some of the nicest principles, in terms of universal destination of the goods of the earth, and in terms of solidarity, sharing with others, the most lofty principles. But you know what the difficulty is? Implementing many of these teachings is where the difficulty emerges. Many of these things are easier said than done. Let me just give you one example here. As early as Rerum Novarum was already talking of economic rights: food, clothing, shelter, medical care. Those are economic rights. This is 1891. To this day, many countries do not actually have economic rights in their constitutions. I think South Africa might have it, but the degree to which they live up to that, I'm not sure. India is trying to move in that direction, so I'm not really sure if they've actually put this in their constitution. But even the West, even the country, even for countries that are really steeped in the human rights tradition, they're very, very careful when it comes to socio-economic rights. Can you guess why this is so? Why? They're really very careful. They're really into the right of freedom of speech, religion, the rights, civil rights, human rights, but not when it comes to socio-economic rights. The big difference here is that civil and political rights are essentially, they're not really expensive because, all you need is, negative freedom, in that don't interfere in anybody else exercising their freedom of speech and assembly. Not in the case of economic rights. In the case of economic rights, if we actually subscribe to economic rights, that means that we together as a community will have to provide those rights for somebody who has no access to food, clothing, and shelter. That is the implication of what it is to buy into socio-economic rights, which is why you can see why governments are very careful. They're very careful before codifying something as difficult as economic rights. So I hope you can see the difference here. Rerum Novarum, oh yeah, it just talks of economic rights, all the way down to all the other modern social documents. They talk about economic rights galore. But when it comes to people who have to govern, they are very, very careful. Point I am driving at is this. There's a difference between teaching and governance. Easier said than done. It's easier to teach than to govern. So this is where the need for metrics comes in, because Catholic social thought, and this is a claim that I have, this is my claim, Catholic social thought will lose its credibility. It will lose its audience if it is in the habit, or if it has a track record of coming up with all these teachings that are very difficult, if not impossible, to implement in practice. We will lose our credibility. People will stop listening and taking it seriously because they will realize that, easier said than done. Governance is very different from the requirements of governments. Governance would be very different. So this is one way of closing the gap. If we actually have all these teachings, well, let's take the next step. Let's see how they can actually be measured and what are the metrics. Because if we actually devote some time for metrics, it is then that we will get to realize that there are difficulties when it comes to governance. So my third case in bringing out the difference between teaching and governance is that it should at least alert us and close the gap between teaching and governance for Catholic social thought. Now, the gap between teaching and governments. This is octogesima adveniens. Octogesima adveniens. It's the famous paragraph number 4. So in this case, this is the 1971 document, clearly in commemoration of Rerum Novarum, where even the church itself says that, we are not here to impose, all these concrete solutions. By its own admission, Catholic social thought is essentially only laying out the general principles. And then, using the principle of subsidiarity, part 1, it is up to the people out there in the field to actually shed light on, what is proper to their own country, to draw principles of reflection, norms of judgment, directives for action, for Catholic social teaching, depending on the context that they have to deal with. And this is where metrics will be very, very helpful. So we cannot simply stay at the level of general principles. Let's push that even further for metrics, because this will actually help people as they live up to the principle of subsidiarity in coming up with all these norms, principles of reflections, directives in moving into action, putting Catholic social thought into action. Okay? So this is octogesima adveniens, paragraph number 4. Let me now move on to the fourth argument as to why there is need for, let me just take a look at the time. Why there is need for metrics. There are trade-offs galore, a lot of trade-offs when it comes to Catholic social thought. This is just one model of Catholic social principles. Catholic social principles, human dignity, and then you go to the second tier reasoning, integral human development, what does it take to flourish in human life, whatever the requirements, and then you can actually divide up, categorize things in the world around us into 3 areas: gift of the self, gift of each other, gift of the earth. And then you could draw and derive in a teleological fashion the principles that we can use in Catholic social thought. So that is what this model is all about. So I just want to show you that, again, one example of easier said than done. Easier said than done. There will be conflicts, even within principles, among principles themselves. There will be tensions within the principles. For example, take a look at this gift of self, subsidiarity. This is part 1 of subsidiarity that says that, let people do what they're able to do for themselves. Do not be paternalistic. If you're a higher body like government, don't step in and do what people are able to do for themselves. Let people exercise their private initiative. That is subsidiarity, part 1. Well, that will actually be in tension with principle of socialization. Principle of socialization is another way of calling part 2 of subsidiarity. Principle of socialization under the gift of each other. Because in this case, what it says is that, well, together as a community, we have an obligation to each other. So we are going to step in and actually, provide whatever assistance is necessary, maybe even intervene and intervention, and maybe restrict you in your private initiatives. Maybe because of solidarity, the requirements of solidarity. For example, solidarity is an active and genuine concern for the well-being of others. Among the critical principles of this would be relative equality. Well, what if I were to tell you that as part of solidarity, relative equality requires you to actually hold back on some of these private initiatives that you have? Again, you already have the tension between the operation of subsidiarity, part 1, versus the requirements of solidarity. So that is one example right there of, if you do not have metrics, how do you know where the line is on which principle should be operative? So that's just one example in terms of subsidiarity in its 2 parts coming in tension with each other. And the need to be able to draw the line. To draw the line, you better have some metrics to be precise. Let me give you a second example. Universal access under the gift of the earth. The longer name for the principle is actually universal destination of the goods of the earth. And so, in the universal destination of the goods of the earth, there is what is called a just use obligation. So, the implication of that, if you own private property, that means that you are obligated to use that property not only for your own well-being and your own welfare, you have the obligation as part of your private property ownership to use that for the welfare of others as well. So that is the just use obligation. Now, one concrete measure for this, as early as Rerum Novarum, the concrete measure here is this. It's whatever is superfluous in your income or wealth has to be used for others. So that's the criterion that it uses as early as 1891. Whatever is superfluous in your income or wealth will have to be used for the benefit of others as part of the just use obligation. He uses Thomas Aquinas by saying that whatever you and your family do not need for your social standing in the community will be considered superfluous. There are many problems with that definition. So eventually it was changed by John the 23rd. It was, relative superfluity is going to be measured by the relative unmet need of your neighbor. So there's a switch right there by John the 23rd. That superfluity is going to be measured by the relative unmet need of your neighbor. So my question is this. Sure, that's easy to say. Take your pick, whichever definition you want to use. Thomas Aquinas in the social status, or the one that was brought back by John the 23rd, relative unmet need of your neighbor. In either case, you need to be able to measure. You have to be able to measure superfluity. And so that would be another case right there of why there is a need for subsidiarity. Let me just make sure that 3, 6, okay. Let me just give you another example right here, just how difficult governance is. This is a model of human rights. This is taken from Theological Studies in an article, 1972, Hollenbach and others. And what they did was to look at pacem in terris, and then to categorize, because the difficulty with pacem in terris, the 1963 document in reaction to the Cuban Missile Scare, is that it is just one right after another. It's a whole slew of rights that, so after a while, it's just like drinking from a water fountain. Fire hydrant. So many rights. So how do you make a distinction after a while? So this is one thing that they did. They actually categorized all those rights. They sliced them up into 8 different categories of rights, and then the ingenious thing in what they did was that they actually differentiated different types of rights, the hierarchy of rights, personal rights, social rights, instrumental rights. So those are what they did in this very good model. Okay? So at your leisure, I just leave it up to you to look for this. If you want to take a look at this, I can give you the bibliography. I should have actually put the bibliography here. But this is available online in a Theological Studies. Now, the difficulty here is the following. There will be clashes between these rights. They will clash. These rights will clash. Not only between economic rights versus religious rights versus communication rights, but in addition to that, personal rights, those concentric circles, they will also clash with each other. Social rights clashing with instrumental rights, clashing with personal rights. How will you adjudicate them? How do you deal with all these clashes? Having metrics will actually go a long way toward helping us be able to figure out what to do when they clash. Because we cannot be arbitrary in the way we actually prioritize one right over another. You better be able to give a reason as to why you are prioritizing one right over another. So there is just no way around not having metrics. So in other words, the fourth argument that I have is that there are so many gray areas in Catholic social thought. There are trade-offs. And metrics are very important, not only in identifying those trade-offs, but they will also be very important in hopefully striking a balance and being able to arrive at a satisfactory resolution of clashing claims between principles. Case number 5, argument number 5. You will observe that the Catholic social doctrines are quite prophetic. Prophetic in the sense that they are really, some of them are really way advanced of their time. Let me just give you an example. Rerum Novarum again. Rerum Novarum was already talking of economic rights at that time. And to this, economic rights came up 1947, 1948, a United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. To this day, people in governance don't want to touch economic rights. So in many ways, it is way, way ahead. So that's an example right there in terms of Rerum Novarum and economic rights. Let me give you another example. Rerum Novarum 1891 was already defending the right of workers. Really, going to bat for labor unions. At least for the United States. For the United States, it was not until the 1930s that there were protections for labor unions. So Rerum Novarum is way, way ahead of that era. Or Laborem Exercens. Laborem Exercens. It is already talking of alternative work arrangements. alternatives to the wage contract arrangements, co-ownership, profit sharing, and those other kinds of arrangements. So there is this tradition in Catholic social thought of being really on the cutting edge. Unfortunately, I would like to claim that not when it comes to measurement. Not when it comes to measurement. This is one real big gap in Catholic social thought. I remember when I was studying economics as a college student. You know, the Samuelson book, the classic Samuelson book on economics, was already talking about the unsatisfactory nature of GDP, because there are so many problems with the measurement of GDP, collapsing everything into one single number of GDP. And even Samuelson himself was not satisfied with GDP. People knew that. And so even as early as maybe 1980s, 1990s, there was already what is called the PQLI. Maybe Sabina, if you remember, the PQLI, the Physical Quality Life Index, to supplement all these measures. So clearly they were not really satisfied. And so since PQLI, more and more measures have come out. As you know, Professor Alkire will show later on, I mean, they've really gone so far in making all these very sophisticated measures that will complement, actually even surpass GDP as a measure of development and well-being. Catholic social thought has not really contributed to this entire area. This is one real need in Catholic social thought. It's not really living up to its prophetic nature. And there is so much that it could actually provide and add to the people who are really on the cutting edge of coming up with these metrics. So this is one blind area of Catholic social thought that I propose should be addressed. Number 6. Case number 6. We are into an examination of conscience. You know, spirituality, we know that at the end of the day, you know, in our personal lives, spiritual lives, you know, we reflect back on what had happened during the day, you know, how, what are the things that can be improved, you know, as part of, you know, Catholic spirituality. I propose that there is something like this that should also be done at the collective level. At the collective level, we don't do it. So let me provide an illustration of something that I had already mentioned to people in my class, in that I had attended a conference on Catholic social thought, and there were 2 cardinals who were giving the presentation on Catholic social thought. At the end of their presentations, the very first question that came up from the floor was and this was the question that came up. And the question was this, you know, Your Eminence, do you know what you are paying your teachers in parochial schools? So you know that Catholic parishes, at least in the US, they run schools. They're called parochial schools. And so that was the very first question that came up the floor that was being asked. You know, Your Eminence, do you know what you are paying your parochial school teachers? And the 2 cardinals immediately knew what the implications of that question was, because some studies indicate that parochial school, Catholic parochial school teachers are paid only about 2/3 of what public school teachers are able to get. And you will be really below the poverty line. But you can see that the choice that they have is closing down these schools or paying less than the others. That's the bind that they have. So this is where, if we have metrics that will actually alert us, hey, you know what, this has been going on for a long time, something has to be done about it, but we don't. Why? Because there are no measures. We don't have measures. So having metrics will actually help us actually evaluate how well or how badly we are doing. So these are just some 6 arguments that just want to make sure I'm not taking too much of the time. 5 minutes? Okay. So these are just some 6 arguments. You can easily add to this. What I'd like to do for the last 5 minutes that I have is just to show you that there is so much that could be done. Let me just give you an example for this one. Some of these are easy to measure. It's what you would call the low-hanging fruit for some of these in terms of measures, because they're already available. They're actually being collected already. For example, the universal destination of the goods of the earth. Universal destination of the goods of the earth. There are so many excellent poverty measures that can actually already alert us to the deficiency when it comes to how well people are able to avail of the goods of the earth. Those are already available right now. This is what I would call low-hanging fruit, that universal access principle. Let me give you a second example of a low-hanging fruit. Subsidiarity, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 has to do with private initiative, how well we're able to exercise our freedom, private initiative. Part 2 has to do with how well does government live up to its obligations to intervene and provide assistance. Well, guess what? There are already readily available measures. Heritage Foundation actually measures economic freedom. They have a freedom index. Or another way of measuring part 2 of subsidiarity is to look at the size of government relative to the market, or the size of government relative to GDP, or the size of the transfers that are being made between different constituents. So those are measures that are readily available. So we could go through many of these. Some of these are much more difficult to measure, but there are others that are already readily available. So it is possible to come up with, at the micro level, come up with measures for each of these principles. So that is one possible approach going forward in the future. Another possible approach going forward in the future is a macro approach. So in this case, one proposal would be trying to have metrics for the common good. Common good. So that would be a real challenge. That is not low-hanging fruit. That is a real challenge. But that is another way of going about it. So I hope I've been able to share some thoughts in making the case for why this is really a gap in Catholic social thought that has to be addressed. That metrics are important for the further development of this field. I thank you for your patience and for your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Barrera. Now I would like to invite Dr. Stefano Menghinello, who is the director of the Italian National Institute of Statistics, where he works at Directorate for Analysis and Enhancement of Economic Statistics and for the information needs of the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. He will present us with a talk on composite in indices. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to have the honor to speak after Father Albino. I think that, after his presentation, I'm very enlightened, and so my first thought will be just to leave the room, because I will not as good as you, but if Sister Helen would be here, she will never let me out. So I have to stay for the friendship and love with Sister Helen. Okay, so basically my very hard task is to reply to Father Albino, but not moving from metaphysics, because I'm not good as you on that, and not even, to think about it, but I would like to start from the other side. So Father Albino start from metaphysics, going down to drill down to the ground, but keeping all the energy and the spirituality of the Catholic total thinking. So we're not talking about materialism, we're talking about reality enlightened by faith. That's why I appreciate very much his presentation. I'm going from the other way around, starting from reality, and we live in we are human beings, and we live in a world which is today largely dominated by number. We are surrounded by number. Given the fact that we are, surrounded by number, is the world we are living in more rational and meaningful because of number? I don't think so. That's the first, my first comment. We are also have to face artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is also dominating the world today, and artificial intelligence does not have a theoretical framework behind. So artificial intelligence is data-driven. This means that what we can learn from artificial intelligence is nothing as compared from what we can learn from Father Albino. It's just processing the number and you have to have more information. Is that information knowledge? This is an open question. And also we live also in a world where composite indices are dominant. If I use the word composite index, possibly you don't understand me, and it is good that you don't understand me because it is a very technical terminology. Composite indices are basically a ranking of country by some phenomenon. So you can rank all the country in the world in terms of GDP. This is easy for us. We are official statisticians. But also you can also rank all the country in the world in terms of happiness, or we can also rank all the country in the world with respect to environment, sustainability, and also by social change. That's what we are facing today. Most of those numbers are not produced by a national statistical authority. Most of them are produced by international organization, which is good. Some other are produced by also private company and so on. So basically we are surrounded by this new type of data, which looks very friendly, but it also is quite complicated to be produced. That's why I would like to introduce you very shortly, in a not very technical way, within the inside black box of a composite indices. Because if you go to the shop and you want to buy an apple, and you see that one apple is not good, you don't buy that apple, unless you want to buy that apple, I think. But on the other side, if you have different number that measure the same phenomenon, you are not in the position to say this is the right number, this is not this is a wrong number. Possibly all those numbers are the right one, but they are measured according to different criteria. So one of the problems about number is that number represent reality, but if you do not have the right technical and scientific background, you are not in the position to say if this number is good or not. This is one of the problems. The quality of data is a big issue for us, but also for like data user. And then Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible, after Father Albino, it would be a bit easier. Can we bring composite indices with Catholic social thinking? Can we establish a connection between those new generation of data with Catholic social thinking? And why shall we do that? Are we going to adopt a sort of passive approach? So we just look around to those indicators and try to see if they are meaningful or not for Catholic social thinking, or are we going to build in the future a new composite indicator which is perfectly online with the Catholic social thinking? I'm going too far, but it's just the opening. So basically, I know that we live in a world surrounded by number, but still there is a very strong demand for correct, so good quality and meaningful data. So we are surrounded by data, but our brain is not powerful enough to synthesize all the data around. So one of our former president, Enrico Giovannini, who has been also the chief statistician at USCD, was also speaking about the rain of number, the storm of numbers. So we have too many numbers around, and those are not very good for our orientation. On the other side, us as human beings, we have a sort of bias. So when we are facing the number, like we have a sort of cognitive bias. So this means that, essentially, the data are a form of information that are not knowledge that really hit our brain. So we understand reality through senses. So if it is hot, we feel this is hot. We feel the smell. This is the way we interact with reality, and data apparently hit our brain. So we think that data are good because they are rational, but on the other side, we have two problems. One problem is that the quality of data that are hitting our brain, is this data the good one or the bad one? And on the other side, we have some bias. One bias is cognitive bias. This means that most of you are making a bet. So, you know, like in Italy, we have a lottery. Everyone in Italy is buying the ticket for the lottery. From a statistical point of view, this is stupid, but we do that. This is a cognitive bias. This means that the human brain is not, you know, rational enough to make a valid judgment, because buying a ticket for the lottery, unless there is some charity behind, is stupid. Okay, that's one sort of cognitive bias. But the other thing, which is even more important, is the manipulation of the public opinion. I'm speaking about fake news. So if you just use data from official statistics, if you just read the academic literature, you have, you know, verified information you have a peer review in academic paper, and in official statistics we also have, you know, from the European Commission, we have we can call them peer review. They're not peer review, just more inspection, but okay. So basically we are controlled for the quality of our data. When we're speaking about fake news, basically the problem is that someone is voluntarily putting those information around, and since we are surrounded by number, we are affected by that. So the public opinion is not connected to digitalization, but digitalization is amplifying the good and the bad of the public opinion. So basically, digitalization is increasing the probability of manipulation. I can give you a lot of examples for that, and those examples are not needed. Okay. And last but not least, we are living a sort of alienation. So we are not too much in contact with reality, unless today we are very in contact with it, but we spend most of the time with our smartphone. And this is sort of an alienation from reality, which also keep a distance from the reality. So the first point is that when you are considering the number, you are moving from reality to something which is artificial, but it doesn't mean that this is the truth. This is knowledge. This is just information, and you have to use your intellect and your moral responsibility to judge the number and always be aware of what you are doing. Just because the number that don't look bad, this doesn't mean that those are good numbers. So you have to use your responsibility. Okay, now let's go very quick through this second slide. Okay, when we are speaking about number, are we speaking about knowledge or are we speaking just about information? People think that numbers are generating knowledge, and this is a problem. So a huge amount of number is generating a huge amount of knowledge. No, a huge amount of number is generating a lot of confusion, which is not knowledge. So basically, going back to the Thomistic tradition, which is well represented here, you know, through the centuries. Okay, I'm just making a single quotation. Jacques Maritain, 1932, the degree of knowledge. Degree of knowledge, what is the kind of knowledge that we can extract from number? This is the very, very low. We can extract a lot of information, but in terms of knowledge, that level of knowledge is very, very low level. Low level knowledge means that what we are exploiting from this huge amount of data is not causality, it's just correlation, and we are just exploiting the partner in the data. This means that this is not knowledge, this is basically the beginning of knowledge. Just we organize the data and we extract some information, but we cannot say that this is knowledge. This is one of the other problems when we are using the data. So what happened also when we are producing the data? When we produce the data, we use a theoretical framework. So the data produced by academic people, empirical analysis, and by official statisticians, they are based on framework. There is a theoretical framework behind GDP. Maybe it's wrong, maybe it's incomplete, but there is a theoretical framework. There is a theoretical framework behind SDGs. Maybe it's not complete, but there is a theoretical framework. Is there a theoretical framework behind artificial intelligence? No. Okay, this is another point that you should think about it. And of course, in official statistics, this theoretical framework is codified in detail. So when we measure GDP, we don't read macroeconomic book, but we have a sort of manual compilation guideline which provides us very, very detailed information. This means that the data coming out from academic scientists and from official statistics are codified, the process is under control, and everything is checked. All other kind of data are just there. And those are the main theoretical framework that have been used in official statistics over the last 100 years. We start with GDP. GDP is measuring a lot of things, not according to the mainstream economic approach, which is the basic production function, which include the capital and the labor and also technology. And what GDP is missing externalities. So basically, GDP is not measuring how much we are using of our environment, and it's not measuring how much we are using about other resources. That's why we are also destroying the system, because we don't measure what we are doing basically completely. But GDP has been a wonderful measure to measure the economic development of many countries. So the fact that now, after World War II, a lot of countries are more wealthy, and we have also, on average, reduced poverty, although differences within and across classes countries are still big in social terms. But what GDP is not measuring is externalities. And also we have the theory of Pigou taxes, which try to measure in monetary terms how much we are not paying for what we are doing now, and this is another big issue. But more recently, also under the pioneering studies of economists that we have here, also statisticians, we have shifted toward sustainable development goals. Sustainable development goal means that we do not have only one goal. We have many goals, and all the other goals are related to, so we have a sort of multidimensional framework which also considers the environment, the social equity, and we have many goals. So we switch from one single goal to many goals. We have 17 goals, and maybe we have 200 indicators. So we have United Nations, with the help of some academic people, they have built and put in practice a huge production framework which updates every country in terms of those indicators. Is that a good thing? Yes, this is a great thing. So basically now, in some countries like Italy, those indicators are included in our policy document. So when we submit our policy, economic policy document to our government, we must have included also some SDG indicators. So those indicators were first designed, measured, and after they are measured, they are included as a goal, as a target for policy. So advanced countries now, they do not only look at GDP, but also they are looking for two other goals because they have a measure for that. Not only developing countries, but also developing countries. More and more, they want to grow more, but they don't want to make the same mistake. So the same mistake is that if you only look to one dimension, you keep growing, and the wealth of the nation increase, but then you have to pay in terms of pollution, in terms of other diseases. So it is also good for developing countries to find the best way to grow by looking to those sustainable development indicators. And then we just arrived to the point raised by Father Albino, which is the conflictuality. So if we have one goal, you destroy the planet, but then you are consistent. You just look at the GDP. But when you have many goals, so you try to incorporate in your model other dimensions, the social, the environment, then you have a problem of just transition. Just, for instance, environment transition, the green transition is very interesting, but it's also quite technology intensive. So how many poor people can afford to buy an electric car? Not many. If you put a regulation that you have to use an electric car, the rich can buy the car, and the poor take the bus. Okay, so this is one typical problem of just transition. Transition is generating social inequality, although in principle, green transition is good. That race, this is very much connected to what Father Albino said. Now, what next? So what next is, I have a question for you. is that after those framework that has been implemented, they are improving a lot the number of indicators that we have. And now some people are starting to consider conflictuality. So they are developing model where conflictuality is managed because we have the data to do it. Now I think we are heading towards a new framework. This framework is still to be designed, is not very clear, but for instance, it should include peace, because we are in a time of conflict. It should increase spirituality, because spirituality is not increased unless directly in the other framework. So now we are heading towards a new framework, which can be more comprehensive, more inclusive, and I hope more spiritual. Okay, and the social doctrine of the Church is watching us on the way we are going to do it, because for the moment our contribution is not very active, at least in terms of designing an empirical framework. So what do we have now? So we are heading toward a new framework, but we still don't have the framework. So what we are doing today, we are surrounded by those composite indices. So basically, composite indices what are composite indices? Are those indices based on a theoretical framework? I would say not really. They are not very theoretically grounded, although they may refer to a theoretical framework, but they are the most common way to disseminate information at the moment. So basically, we are surrounded by many rankings of countries, and just to quote some of them, we have the UN Human Development Index, the OECD Composite Lead Indicator, which is a more economic growth indicator, and we have the Growth Competitiveness Index produced by the World Economic Forum, and also we have an happiness index. So looking at the happiness index, people say, okay, I live in the country where the people is more happy than in the other country in the world. Those indicators are there, they are published, and people look at them and they think, and they believe that those indicators are the truth, are the knowledge. That's one of the points, is that how much can the social Catholic thinking can help us to have a right judgment of those indicators. They're there, but we do not have yet expressed our opinion. Do we have to follow them or not? And this is basically the answer. But we are not yet at the point to consider those indicators from the social Catholic thinking point of view. We are still in a very, I would say, methodological neutral phase. So basically, composite indicators, are they useful measure of fake news? This is the title of this presentation. In my understanding is that the answer is not straightforward. It depends very much on the process. So if composite indicators are built in a very consistent and rigorous way, they can provide useful information. If they are not built in a very consistent way, possibly they are fake news. Okay, let's have a look to the World Happiness Report. If you look at the World Happiness Report, well, this is the ranking in this year, 2024. Of course, the ranking is measure the situation with respect to the previous 3 years. Otherwise, you will not have Israel, number 5. Now it's not number 5, Israel. But based on the average of the previous 3 years, Israel is number 5. So this is basically, is this an information? Yes. Is this a fake news? No. Is that knowledge? Not really. So basically, my opinion is that this indicator is quite useful to rank the country, but also we have to understand, even from a not technical approach. So I'm not using my professional expertise and just looking at this ranking, and what I can tell you as an economist, before then as official statistician, is that there is a very high correlation with GDP per capita. This means that GDP at the end of the day is not such a bad measure, let's put it this way, because somehow the country with the higher GDP per capita are there. So basically, can we say that happiness is still measured by GDP? Not really, but what you find is that the top country are the country in the world where people is more rich per capita. And this means something. And the second point is that we have a cluster effect. So all the northern country are there. So we have a cluster of Scandinavian country, and we also have a cluster of countries which are living in the north. Maybe the cold help to be happy. It should be the sun, but we don't know. And also we have some potential outliers. Potential outliers are Costa Rica, Austria, Ireland, Czechoslovakia, and Lithuania. You know, those are positive outliers because those countries, they do not have such a good GDP per capita. So I'm happy that they are there because this means that this ranking is not dominated entirely by GDP per capita. But also there are some outliers. You know, you see this country full of tourists, full of sun, and we are not even making the first 20 position. Italy is out. Why is Italy out? Because of the indicators that are considered, but essentially possibly there is something missing to keeping this country out of this ranking. And coming to think to other considerations which are more serious is that there is also a contradiction in those indices, because if you look at the suicide rate, I'm not talking about the absolute number of suicide. I'm still talking about per capita number of suicide. This means how many suicides we have every 100,000 people. The highest rate of suicide is Lithuania, Belgium, Finland, Sweden. Top. Okay? Are those externality? From the social point of view, one human being can be sacrificed. So this is a very ethical question. So, okay, this sentence, okay, this sort of comment was made by the Sole 24 Ore. Sole 24 Ore is our financial newspaper, the leading one. They say, okay, everyone look at this happiness indicator, but please look at the suicide per capita. So I would just like to acknowledge that. And of course, because Italy was not there, we were a bit upset. But still the truth is there. So suicide are quite high in those countries which are the most happy in theory in the world. So the question is that, do we have a spurious correlation? This means weather conditions in the Nordic country generate suicide independently from the money, or something like that. In the case of Belgium, we also have a regulation which is quite, I will not say liberal, but quite in favor of assisted end of life. So basically, that will make easier to commit suicide. This is unfortunately, another consideration. By the end of the day, are we measuring happiness from the point of view of the social doctrine of the church? That is the question, and I leave it open to you. Now, let's look at inside the black box of composite indicator. You have a ranking, and you like the ranking, so this is quite interesting, because people trust number better than anything else. So if anything is represented by number, you are happy. If the same thing is not represented by number, you don't. So there is a number effect. Also, I think that we also have a sort of hypnotic effect of the ranking. You have a ranking and say, okay, this is a ranking, it's easy to do, it should be right. No. So I call it a hypnotic effect. So basically, unless you are an official statistician, and of course, unless you have the knowledge of our speaker, which is much higher than an average statistician, also the best statistician, I would say that we have to open the black box. So when you have a ranking, what do we have behind this ranking? How this ranking is built? So there are three key elements when you build a composite indicator. You have a conceptual design. So at the beginning, there is someone that has said, okay, I will not put those indicators together randomly. I have to think the way I do it. So there is a sort of theoretical framework that should be designed before you produce a good composite indicator. The best composite indicators are produced by using a theoretical framework. Other composite indicators, they don't use a very strong theoretical framework, so the output is not that good. So the first point is that you have to identify if this composite indicator is rooted on economic theory, on something which is solid, or it's just a bunch of indicators that they're just put there. So that okay, what I'm thinking about is defined by the OECD manual. So the OECD is not only a statistic, it's not an official statistical authority. is just a think tank, a global think tank, but they have a lot of knowledge and a very high reputation on official statistics. A large portion of official statistical manual are written by the OECD, although OECD is not purely speaking like the United Nations Division of Statistics, so they are very good. And also in 2008, they have published this manual. This manual is basically designed the best practice to build composite indicators. So if you are interested, you can read this manual, which is in English. If you want to read in Italian, we have also a famous author in our institution, which is Matteo Mazziotta, who has been publishing extensively on that. But the basic idea, not going inside technical issue, there are three key issues which guarantee that the composite indicator is a good one. The first one is that it should have a conceptual design. It's not always theoretically grounded, but conceptual design is needed. It should use data of very high quality, otherwise poor quality data, poor quality composite indicator. And also they have to take into account methodological issue. So in the process of building this indicator, you have to manage and to correct for some problem, biases, and I will not get inside that very much. I'm trying to introduce you a bit the theoretical framework, which is behind the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index is historically one of the first composite indicator. It's quite easy, relatively easy, not that complicated, but basically we have three dimensions. One dimension is a long and healthy life. The second dimension is knowledge, and then you have a decent standard of living. So basically, this is composite indicator, which is a rank of countries. So you look at the rank and you say, okay, this is the truth. Clearly tell you how this indicator is built. So this is the conceptual framework behind this composite indicator. But by looking at this picture, you understand what is human development for this indicator. Is human development related to other dimension? No, it's only limited to long and healthy life, which is one dimension, which is also interesting for the social doctrine of the church, is also related to knowledge, human capital, which is good, and also decent standard of living, which is poverty. So it captures three very interesting dimensions of the social doctrine of the church. Is it capturing those dimensions in the best way? Probably not. Is it ignoring other dimensions? Probably yes. So this is just to try to build a bridge between the Catholic sort of thinking. So if you want to have a judgment of one composite indicator, you can do some consideration by looking at the number, but the best consideration, you should go inside the methodology and try to see how the principles are applied and how they are consistent with the social with the Catholic doctrine, Catholic economic thinking. Okay, now let's go to the last part of the presentation. How much time do you have, sir? Okay, 20 minutes. Okay, so this is a mission impossible. So we have a bridge, and the bridge is not complete. I don't know who's going to complete this bridge sooner or later, but basically, Father Albino has just provided us a lot of good motivation why this bridge should be built. I provide you other motivation, which are more human, let's put it this way. So basically, the fact that if you don't have number today, people don't believe you. This is one of the problems, I think. Having the number to quantify businesses, to quantify government action, governance policy is essential today if you want to compare, and also if you want to establish if this is good money to invest on that private investment or in that public investment. In the area of businesses, we speak about accountability. Accountability means that within a company, if you want to invest or to hire people or to say, okay, I'm going to have I'm going to be more oriented to SDGs, you have to be accountable for that. Otherwise, they will not let you do it, basically. So accountability is important with a private company, but also inside international organization, because financial constraint. In terms of policy, we have a sort of, we call them quantitative informed policy. Quantitative informed policy means that we want to apply a policy, but then before you apply the policy, we have to do some a priori analysis, impact evaluation, something like that. So many failure in policy could have been avoided just by applying quantitative informed method, because you do a priori evaluation and an impact evaluation, and in that process you can adjust the policy measure to make them more effective. So number are needed, but strictly speaking, a very large distance is perceived between Catholic social thinking and number. So before Father Albino, I don't know, after yes, but before Father Albino, I don't know how many of you would have bet that Catholic social thinking can be associated with number. Most of you can think, okay, this is a spiritual issue, this is about human freedom, what about number? Okay, so that's why I was so happy that Father Albino spoke before me. So there is a distance today, huge distance, okay? Now is the fact, can we measure this distance? So the starting point is not say, okay, there is no distance. This is against the principle of reality. There is a huge distance between number and the Catholic social teaching. Can we measure that? Can we understand which are the motivations that keep Catholic social thinking so far from number? And the second point is that how can we build the bridge? So we want to measure, before we build the bridge, we want to see how far are those dimensions. Then is it possible to build a bridge? And in doing that, I was struggling a bit. I was speaking with Sister Helen, and then she said, oh, listen, we have to wait until the spring, until Father Albino will be here, and then everything will be fixed. So basically, the idea is that if we want to bridge Catholic social thinking with composite index already available, we have to go through a process. The first dimension of this process is the measurability of Catholic social thinking. Can we measure Catholic social thinking? This is a sort of epistemological and spiritual question. After that, can we establish a coherence between Catholic social thinking principle and the key component of a composite indicator? And after that, do we have enough accurate indicator to build the system? Those are the three steps. So what Father Albino has taught to us today is that there is a possible framework that can be established to measure Catholic social thinking. This framework is broad, is a bit complex, but we have a beginning. So basically, the idea is that, Father Albino basically starts to say that there is a spiritual dimension. There is also not only a spiritual dimension, but also there is a dimension which is related to the human being. So we are not going to measure what is inside the human being. This is out of the scope of this indicator. But basically, when we move from the spirituality to the real life, basically we can think about in terms of integral human development. Integral human development is the actualization of human dignity. Human dignity is not measurable, otherwise it is a sin, but integral human development can be measured, not directly, but we can identify the condition that can support the flourishing of human being, and those conditions are material and are also spiritual, but they are outside and they are in the real world. So the basically framework provided by Father Albino he shows us a picture in his presentation. He has identified, also the other point is that the Catholic social thinking has also a sort of a historical dimension, is an evolution, and it is prophetic. So it is a little bit hard to control because it is evolving through time. But Father Albino said, okay, this is something which is led by spirituality and is also evolving and connected to history, but there are some principles which are permanent. The situation change, the solution change, but there are some key principles which can be considered permanent. And if those principles are permanent, we can use them in the framework because they're stable. And so he has highlighted us 3 types of gift: the gift of the self, the gift of each other, and the gift of creation. And now we are getting a bit closer to SDGs, because we are trying to contextualize what we are doing. This doesn't mean that the SDGs already are the solution, but we are getting closer to them. So what can we measure empirically? We can measure the lived condition and the circumstances that can support the full development of personal endowments. This is not happiness. This is spiritual happiness. The other happiness is that I buy an ice cream, I have a walking room. Okay, if you want to measure that, this is another business. Our business here, not my business in my office, is to measure the real happiness. The real happiness is not pleasure, is not only pleasure, is more human flourishing. That's why happiness indicator is more a game up to some extent, and what we have to head to is something which is more prophetic and less material. And what can we do? We can apply, we can try to measure what is measurable. And what is measurable is the indirect impact of material, social, economic, and spiritual environment condition for the human flourishing. At the end of the day, the choice is up to the human being. In Finland, not everyone is happy. Someone could commit suicide. In Rome, not everyone is happy, although I guess many, okay. So happiness is inside. And I'm speaking about pleasure and happiness. When I speak about enlightenment of the man, this is something completely unmeasurable, but the circumstances, since we live inside the reality, those are measurable, and those should be measured at least. Okay, so moving ahead, we have to find a way to, to define some metrics to define at least a sort of so the first step is try to compare not directly the composite indicator, not directly the ranking with the social, with the Catholic social thinking. So if you think that now we are done and we can, after Father Albino, we look at the happiness indicator and we say, okay, let's move that country up and down. No, we are not at that stage. Okay, we need a lot of more work. And the work that should be done is that we have to further exploit the social principles highlighted by Father Albino. So the gift of the self is connected to our lower level, so second tier level, which is the supremacy of labor, subsidiarity, gift of the earth, gift of each other, participation, relative equality, gift of the earth, universal access, and stewardship. Those are even more measurable, still challenging, but more measurable than the upper level. But still we are going down, we are drilling down in a framework which is consistent with the Catholic social teaching. All the other indicators are built according to other framework, which can be closer, farther, but what we're doing, we are trying to go to this process. So this level, so those second level tier of Albino Barrera framework are getting much closer to what is feasible to measure at the moment. So what I have illustrated on that part of the slide is that we have many different composite indicators. Each spidergram represents a composite indicator, and we can test those indicators based on their dimension. As I showed you to you before, I'm going just a bit back. We have the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index has 3 dimensions: long and healthy life, knowledge, and decent standard of living. We can try to represent those dimensions, not the number, not the empirical, just have those dimensions consistent with the social principle included in Albino Barrera framework. So we can establish that point of view. This is a sort of comparing their conceptual framework with our conceptual framework. This is something that can tell you, for instance, that without looking at the number, that the happiness indicator is not completely consistent with our framework, independently from the ranking. So I'm not thinking that, I'm not trying to push Italy up. Okay, I'm not making joke. Okay, so for the moment, the happiness indicator can be evaluated methodologically from how far is this framework from the Catholic social thinking. This means that is it measuring the right dimension of happiness? Not all of them, not in the best way. Okay, this is the answer. And also, we can also do the same with other composite indicators. So this can be a sort of exercise that can be done conceptually. So without any, econometric skill or statistical skill, you can do that. And I think this is quite interesting to see how far are those conceptual framework with our conceptual framework. Okay, now we go down to the last step, and the last step is, do we have a data gap? A data gap means, do we have the right indicator to put inside the machine and to have the right composite index? Yeah, we have a lot of number, a lot of indicators are there. I would say that we have thousands of indicators and some, 100, we have at least 300 composite indicators around the world and 5,000 indicators globally. Okay, I think that a lot of work can be done with those indicators already, because also we have established the right weight, so we have some methodological work to do. But there are for sure other indicators which need to be developed specifically to apply the Catholic social thinking. As Father Albino said, the accessibility to so the public good is a key issue. Can we today measure the public, the access to the common good, in the best way? Not completely. But I think, so we have, just to conclude, we have to start try to change our mindset. Is the Catholic social thinking measurably? The theological part, no, it's not measurable. The spiritual part is not measurable. The empirical part or the circumstances that can support the flourishing of human being can be measured. So this is basically indirect measure. And now we have to go through the comparing the conceptual framework and try to find or to build new indicator. That will be the process. Now this is a sort of slide where I try to compare not the number, but just the component. So I put in the center the key social principle of Catholic social thinking. So those are the principles outlined by Father Albino, second tier level of his framework. And we can try to compare the wording with the other dimension from other indicators. Is that fit well or does not fit well? Or, okay, this is very superficial as a side, but this is step number one. Are those frameworks comparable or not? And now we have to find the indicator. Okay, conclusion. So I think that in a world dominated by number, we need synthesis and trusted data. Few data we can trust, few data that can provide synthetic description. Otherwise, we are lost in number. Composite indices can be fake news or cannot be fake news, independent on the quality of the process. And Catholic social thinking calls for some empirical evidence. Why do we need empirical evidence? Father Albino has already provided us a lot of motivation. I think that Catholic knowledge should be, shared with other culture, with other people. And I think that Catholic social thinking is a relevant body of knowledge that should be, shared with other people with different belief. And composite indicators are not the unique solution. I'm sure that the person speaking after me should also highlight other metrics. This is just one of the metrics. I think that given the stage of development of the theoretical framework, composite indicator can be a good compromise, because composite indicators are data intensive and not that demanding in terms of theoretical framework. I think this is a good balance today. Possibly it's not a good balance for the future. Last but not least, this is basically a message from Sister Helen. She believed that this university has the right combination of skill, knowledge, and competencies to do that. To build a composite indicator, you cannot do that MIT, Harvard, whatever, because they are the best in that vertical field. We need interdisciplinary approach. This is the right place, because we have a full interdisciplinary approach ranging from statistics to social science to theology. The knowledge is here, basically. And also we are also to exploit international linkages, because without Father Albino and without the other speaker, we will not go very far. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Menghinello. Now I would like to invite Dr. Sabina Alkire to give her presentation. She is the director of the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative at the Department of International Development at University of Oxford. She's a professor of poverty and human development, and her research interests include multidisciplinary poverty measurement and analysis, welfare economics, the capability approach, and the measurement of freedoms and human development. So Sabina, please.
Thank you so much. It's really good to be here, and I look forward very much to the exchange and the hearing from you. More, I'm just trying to plug in my phone so I know what time it is, but maybe I'll just ask. What I wanted to do in this is, first of all, just give a brief recognition that we live in a time and in a context when there is demand for new and novel metrics of well-being, and show a few of the different spaces and a few of the different initiatives. And then I should underline that everything that we just heard from ISTAT, from Stefano Menghinello, is something I would agree with, that composite measures are feasible now, and that they, with greater attention to their normative framework, they can be very powerful tools. But I will introduce an alternative methodology of counting-based approaches that may be interesting, briefly showing the methodology, but in a way which is possible for people who aren't so keen on the mathematical parts, and one implementation in a poverty measure. And then moving to the idea of integral human development, show not something from the Catholic teachings, but something from a different context, the country of Bhutan, which has tried to implement its conception of gross national happiness, just so we get an idea of what this looks like when it's at the individual level. And then talk, building on Father Albino's presentation, on some other adjustments that would be needed for a more complete suite of measures on the Catholic social teaching, mainly using units of analysis other than the individual person, but looking at communities or institutions. So that's, in a sense, a brief arc of what to cover. So to begin, we live in a time when there is a great demand for better measures of well-being. In 2021, the UN Secretary General called for a committee to be formed that would look at going beyond GDP, and Italy was a voice shaping that demand at the highest level of the UN. And there was a high-level committee on programs, the core group on beyond GDP, that was set up, and that issued a report valuing what counts, and that also looked at the need to go beyond even adjusted measures of GDP to look at a small suite of measures that would look at people and the planet. And that is just the latest in a set of initiatives that basically have lasted 15 years. So in 2019, for example, the OECD did a follow-up to the 2009 Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission that President Sarkozy of France set up. And it also articulated a need to go beyond GDP with ideas of what this would be, but also well-being metrics beyond GDP. And that was complemented by a large initiative at Princeton, led by Marc Fleurbe, which looked at the International Study of the Progress of Societies. And they initially had 3,000 pages. They whittled it down to 900 in their final volumes. And they involved over 250 academics from around the world. And they looked at many dimensions of well-being, as you will see there. All of these are very positive. None of them frontally included spirituality, the more profound aspects of human well-being and relations. The religions chapter of ISPS is worth a read, but it might be interesting to look at both the overlays and the growth in the direction of Catholic social teachings. For example, a Manifesto for Social Progress prioritizes a language of virtue, but also on the aspects that are still overlooked, that are still sidelined and left behind. And coming back to 2009 in the report of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission, they articulated 8 dimensions of quality of life that they argued should be measured alongside GDP and green GDP. And these included many aspects that would again resonate. Health and education, like the Human Development Index, labor, drawing on rerum novarum and going beyond it, political voice and governance, so a kind of subsidiarity, social connections and relationships, recognizing the fundamental value these have to us, and also security and environment. But again, transcendent aspects of religion or prayer or spirituality, meditation, mental health are not there. But this is suggesting that there is a demand. There's a demand not just from the institutions of the Catholic social teaching, but also from secular institutions at high levels, and that there would be interest in innovative metrics that came up that tried to have policy relevant and sensible responses. So what are the most likely measurement approaches? The most likely is a dashboard. And the next most likely is a composite index. And by composite index, it is an average, some kind of an average of existing data that may be drawn from different years and are certainly drawn from different data sources. And so it's feasible because those data exist. And it's not too demanding. And there are many such indices beyond the Human Development Index. There's the Global Peace Index, which is perhaps the methodologically most rigorous. OECD has a Better Life Index. There's a Social Progress Index, much more extensive, 153 indicators, sometimes 10 years apart. Legatum Prosperity Index. Then there are groups arguing very much for a small dashboard of composite indices. And then what I'll be presenting later is possibilities that are not yet feasible of counting-based indices. So just to give you an idea of some of these and their strengths and their challenges, the UK already, like many countries, has a dashboard of well-being measures. It began with 41, it went up to 64. In 2023, it was 60. And a dashboard of 60 gives 60 results. And when a journalist comes up and says, has well-being gone up or down or stayed the same, the statistician has to talk about 60 different things. And so there's a challenge of communication. There's also a challenge in that philosophically, more is always better. More of each indicator is always better. But we live on a limited planet, and our vocations and our needs are different. Some people are committed to an absolute level of simplicity, and more would not be better for them, for example. And so this pluralism of human vocation and the recognition of planetary limits might not be taken into account. Also, there's a problem of equity because it aggregates everyone together. And so there might be values in showing disaggregations or in looking at people who fall short of some kind of societal norm. The OECD draws on a Better Life Index, a composite measure, which has 11 dimensions, the 8 of the Stiglitz-Sen-Fitoussi Commission, but then with 3 other economic-related indicators. And so there are many composite measures, and we'll come back to them, but just so that you plug into your mind one of them. SAGE is a very innovative group, global social innovations group based in Germany, but including many of the G7 countries, and very much trying to advocate into the space of beyond GDP, as is OECD. Both of the institutions are deeply engaged. And they recommend 4 indices that I put up because of the overlaps: the Solidarity Index, giving, trusting, supporting others. The Agency Index, recognizing our need for practical reason to shape our destiny, individual subsidiarity in the labor market, employment, life expectancy, years of education, confidence, and empowering indices. Material gain, measured by GDP, and environmental sustainability, measured by an index. But there might be some challenges in these composite measures and dashboards. I already mentioned the challenge that more is not always better, depending on our vocation and on the planetary. But also, and pluralism, but also in terms of measurement, we might want to know by state, by age, by religious affiliation, by caste, occupation. We might want to know which groups are experiencing the highest and lowest levels of well-being. Migrants, how are they in Finland? But also there's some normative principles. In my line of work, we would call them axioms or properties. And these are mathematical representations of value principles. So for example, one idea that we have is that if somebody is not very well off in one dimension of their life, let's say they're okay, but in terms of happiness, they're severely depressed. And then they are able, through mindfulness, through whatever clinical or performance or behavioral change, to address their deprivation, and every other aspect of their life is as good as it was before, we might think that their well-being would increase. And if a measure, a composite measure, had depression in it, we might expect that measure to improve. But given the structure of many composite indices, with the normalization and with the weighting structures, it's not actually certain that there would be that link between a individual improvement and a monotonic, that means very consistent, reliable, predictable improvement in the well-being measure. So there might be some challenges there. There are also, on the other side, some challenges statistically, that when we have data, we know it's not always exact. And so we have total error, and we have sampling errors or standard errors. And at a minimum, we would want some measures to include a recognition of also the imprecision that is known of statistics. But composite measures, because they include different kinds of measures, when they rank countries, they're taking each statistic as actually perfect and not looking at the surrounding errors. So it might be useful to look at some of those issues as well, because sometimes the distance in rankings is teeny tiny, and I do wonder if it's statistically significant. So I won't go through in detail, but we could take, for example, the Human Development Index. It uses country averages of life expectancy or of years of schooling. But that will be averaging out somebody with a PhD and somebody who hasn't finished elementary school. And on average, of course, they will be beyond high school. And so the averages that are inherent in these composite measures when they take average attainments don't necessarily look at inequities that persist. So let me explore a different approach of measures, which Sir Tony Atkinson called counting-based measures, drawing on the tradition in Europe since the 1970s. And there's been a similar tradition in Latin America also since the 1970s. In Latin America, since the Cocuyo Declaration in Chile, and in Europe since the 1972 n.1 meeting here. So if you look at Father Albino, Sister Helen, Marina, and myself, we are 4 people, and you're going to look at 4 aspects of our life. Let's say income, education, shelter, and water. And Father Albino is deprived in income. Sister Helen is deprived in education, which is definitely not the case, but this is a fictitious example. Marina is deprived in shelter, and I'm deprived in water. So the D on the left-hand side is deprivation, and ND is non-deprivation. So we're not looking at all of well-being, but as Stefano said, we're looking at, in a sense, the causes or the social minimum required for well-being. And we're distinguishing that from people who might have enough by whatever standard. And in the left matrix, you see that each person is deprived in one thing. And then you look at the societal average, and you see that 1/4 of the population of 4 people are deprived in each of the measures. Are you with me? All that I present will only use multiplication and division, and it's quite simple. So I do apologize if it looks funny, but it's that simple. But a counting-based measure is also interested in the overlaps. But look at the right-hand matrix. In that, Father Albino, Sister Helen, and Marina don't have any deprivations, but one person has 4 deprivations. But by a composite measure that takes the average, you just look at the bottom, the 25%. And in that measure, 25% of the population are deprived in each indicator. Do you see that? So a counting-based measure looks across all of these 4 indicators for each person. So instead of adding up across all people in the society, so going vertical, standard composite measures go vertical and add up that way, a counting-based measure adds up for each person. It counts the deprivations they have at an individual level, and then it looks across people. So if you look at this on the left-hand side, you count, and there's 1 deprivation per each of the 4 people. And on the right-hand matrix, you see 1 person is deprived in 4. So that's the basic difference between a composite measure and a counting measure. Is that clear? So what would a well-being or an integral human development or integral human flourishing measure do in that case? And I'll take a simplified example. One could go much further and have actual levels of well-being, but I'll just do the most simple, which would be to set a set of indicators and then ask, what is enough? What is the minimum for well-being in that domain? A person can have more, but let's say, what is the minimum? And then measure it for each person. Yes or no, do they have the minimum? And then if you want to weight the indicators, you can. And then you add up what proportion of those indicators does each person have a deprivation in? Is it 1/4? Is it 4 out of 4, 100%? And you could, if you wished, go further and identify who has well-being. And you could do so recognizing we don't need everything. We may have vocational patterns that mean that we can be deprived in some, and others would make us flourishing. And so rather than requiring each person to have 100%, you could say if they have half, if they have 2/3, some proportion as a cutoff, then that is enough to flourish. And then you could immediately identify who in the society has the causes or conditions of flourishing and who does not. And then you could aggregate information up into an index that could be broken down because it's at the level of each person. So you can break it down by any variables for which the data are representative. And you could also break it down by indicator to say, what do we have to do in Finland, in Italy, in Sierra Leone, in Somalia, in order to have the biggest impact? And so this kind of an approach is more data requiring, so it's not feasible at a global level, though national measures could be developed. But it does have some ways of addressing some of the overlaps of looking at each person rather than just at the average, of permitting a person voluntarily by their own values or vocations to opt out of high levels of some indicator, and also by informing policy. So, and standard errors can be done, robustness tests can be done, and are always done for these kind of measures. So I'm not going to go through this very quickly, very completely for time. I think I'll skip the more axiomatic approach, only to say that the slides have an approach for 4 people in 4 dimensions. And they show very briefly that you use a cutoff, a standard for each dimension to dichotomize, to see if each person has sufficiency or not, is deprived or not in each indicator. And if you wish to weight the indicators, you weight them. And then, just like I showed, you count the particular deprivations or insufficiencies each person has. So we build on the insufficiency, and I'll show the transition into happiness later, or well-being. And then you can set a cutoff of flourishing. And if a person does not have that sufficiency cutoff, they are deprived, or they are poor, or they are not yet happy. And if they have that, or more than that, then they would be they would be happy or not poor. But as we are in the space of deprivations, if a person has too many deprivations, they are not yet happy. And if they are not deprived, then they are happy. And when we do this, then immediately we can count what percentage of the population have well-being. But that is not enough. So this is what I wanted to focus on. Going back to our principle of monotonicity, if a person, for example, who is not yet happy, becomes deprived in something else, we would want happiness to go down or poverty to go up. And if you only look at the percentage of people who are happy, and then somebody loses their job, then that wouldn't happen. So the headcount ratio will not show changes among the not yet happy people. And that's really what we would want to focus on. So we add something else. We look for the people who are not yet happy. We look at the average deprivations that they experience. So in this example, the second person is deprived in half, and the last person in all of the indicators. And we want to add that in. And so we call that the average intensity. And here among deprivations, it's 3 out of 4 deprivations, which is the average of half and 100%. So 2/4 plus 4/4 is 6/4, divided by 2 is 3/4. So the average intensity among these 2 people is 3/4. And when you multiply the number of people, the proportion of people who are, in this case, poor, not yet happy, which is half of the population, and you multiply that by intensity, which is 3/4, then you get a number. And that number has some axiomatic or formal properties. It can be disaggregated, it can be broken down by dimension, but also it monotonically responds. If anybody who is not yet happy, who is poor, becomes more deprived, then poverty goes up, happiness goes down. And for those of you who like mathematical elegance, this is also the mean of the matrix. My co-author, James Foster, is a mathematician and economist and loves elegance. So it's very simple. I'd like to show you briefly one empirical example and then move of poverty and then move to the final example of well-being. So in the case of poverty, with UNDP since 2010, we've built a poverty measure that's a sister to the Human Development Index, It's a counting-based measure using microdata that covers 110 countries and 6.1 billion people, with the same dimensions of the HDI, health, education, and living standard. In this case, it has 10 indicators. And each of these indicators are defined that a person is deprived or non-deprived. For example, in the north of Nepal, we visited Tamang, and she's a mother and a grandmother, but her husband was undernourished. Her husband was also disabled, but we did not have an indicator of disability. Measurement is very imperfect, and it leaves important things out. But somebody in her household, of her husband, and her granddaughter was deprived. But they were not deprived in child mortality, in years of schooling or school attendance, because her granddaughter was attending school and had completed already more than 6 years of schooling. But they cooked with wood, which she obtained from the forest, and it was dangerous because there are rhinoceroses in the forest, and she also sold wood as her livelihood, so it was a precarious livelihood. They used open defecation. They took their drinking water from a river. They had electricity for a light bulb, so they were not deprived in electricity. But their house, as you could see, was made of bamboo, which must be replaced in that climate every 1 or 2 years. And they did not have more than one of a small set of assets: a radio, a telephone, including a cell phone, a television, animal cart, a wooden cart, a computer, a bicycle, or a motorcycle. So the only asset that she had was an animal cart, which actually was a human cart because they didn't have animals. So they were deprived in assets. So that's an example of a deprivation profile. Her score, she was deprived in 44% of the weighted indicators. The cutoff was 33%. She had more than the cutoff, so she was poor. So that's an example of implementing the measure. And if we look at this, and I'd like to do this only because you could think of what this would mean if there was a measure of integral human development of this kind, we could say across 6.1 billion people that 1.1 billion people are poor. Could we say how many people have the causes and conditions of integral human development in a parallel metric? We could disaggregate it by children, and half are children. We could look at rural urban areas. In the case of poverty, 84% of the poor live in rural areas. We could compare it with monetary metrics. For example, in the case of multidimensional poverty, the incidence goes from 0% in Serbia to 91% in Niger. So the height of the bar is the percentage of people who are poor. But monetary poverty are the black dots, and they're quite different. What would it be if we had a measure of integral human development? How would it be different from a monetary poverty measure? Stefano said it was very highly correlated with monetary. Would that be the same if we looked at integral human development? But another advantage is that not only do you look at the level, but you look at each indicator. So the colored stripes are the 10 indicators of the MPI. So we can look at sub-Saharan Africa on the left-hand side. But you can look at the countries of sub-Saharan Africa in the middle, or the states of Senegal on the right. And you can see not only the level, which is the height of the bar, but the indicator composition. And this matters for subsidiarity, because if you are the governor of Kafrine, the poorest state in Senegal, or Bihar, the poorest state in India, that would be important. And in India, we go to district level. And you can look not only at a national level, or at a comparative level, but within each country. As we see, you can look at the incidence, the intensity, and the composition of poverty for different areas within India and different states of India, just to take one example. And then you could also look over time and say in what number of countries has integral human development increased. And where has it decreased the fastest? For example, in the case of multidimensional poverty, India got 415 million people out of poverty in 15 years, a very dramatic proportion. akin to the rate of reduction of monetary poverty in China in the height of the 1990s to mid-2000s. Furthermore, it was done by reducing deprivations in all 10 indicators, with the poorest groups, which are Muslims, which are the states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh, which are rural areas, and the castes like scheduled tribes. Those groups reduced poverty the fastest in absolute terms, a positive leaving no one behind finding. So this is the kind of data that one could do. And the important thing would be that it could also therefore be used in a subsidiarity sense by actors in and outside government and at different levels. For this, I switch briefly to permanent official statistics of poverty, which are official statistics, which are reported as MPIs for 41 countries and 2.9 billion people at present, with that expected to increase. And those are the countries. Recently, a book by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Juan Manuel Santos was published, where he showed the reduction in monetary and multidimensional poverty in Colombia. And he also said that as president, I realized I couldn't build peace if I didn't reduce poverty. And so I took leadership as president of social policy. And the book describes the battle against poverty, describes how he did this. He had previously published a book, The Battle for Peace, La Batalla por la Paz, where he looked at the peace process. So he gave a lot of examples in Colombia of how he used their MPI, which he launched personally in 2011, as a policy tool. Because for metrics, it's not only, as Father Albino said, it's not only teaching, but it's also governance, and using metrics as governance. We are learning from countries how they use the MPI, and they perhaps could use a linked well-being measure for governance. They complement monetary poverty. In Paraguay, poverty reduced from 41 to 26% in 8 years. They track poverty over time. They allocate resources in the budget. They target the poorest groups. They coordinate across different ministries, and they adjust by what works as time goes on and they learn. So for example, in Costa Rica, when MPI launched at 2015, they found big differences between the indicators of poverty and the budget allocation. And so they reallocated. There was a time of fiscal austerity. They reallocated in the same budget envelope. And what you see is an acceleration in the reduction of poverty from simple reallocation. And the man who was minister at the time then became the next president, Carlos Alvarado. In Panama, when they launched their MPI, they found that whereas in Panama City, or Panama, the capital city, 8.5% of people were poor, in the indigenous comarcas, over 90% of people were poor. So again, they knew that, but metrics nailed it. They had done a lot of participatory work in Panama, but this gave a number that helped them with the budget allocations. And in Mexico and in Colombia, many countries have described cost savings by integrated social policies that try to move several SDG indicators, several MPI indicators at the same time. And finally, in Nigeria, which disaggregates its MPI to the senatorial district level, they observed, obviously, as you can see here, that the priorities for each senatorial district vary. And so below the state level, in Nigeria, there are 34 states, and they're very much the core of government policy. But even down to the district level or the LGA level, the actors needed data to know what to focus on, because it differed a lot, even within states of Nigeria. So these are examples of where perhaps a measure of well-being could have traction and could push the envelope. Briefly, I'd like to conclude with the example of the Gross National Happiness Index of Bhutan, not because it's right and a perfect embodiment of Catholic social teachings, but it describes how a different religious framework has tried and struggled in a very imperfect way to implement a parallel idea. I won't go into the mathematics of its measurement, but it's 1 minus the MPI. because they wanted, like a poverty measure, all of the actionable elements of an MPI, but they wanted to focus on the positive as a national statistic. And this is work done by the Royal Government of Bhutan, and slides are used with permission from it, and it's led by Dashokarma Ura. When His Majesty the Fourth King was a teenager, he made the now famous statement that gross national happiness is more important than gross domestic product, gross national product. And so that became GNH is more important than GNP, which in those days, GNP was what was used. For many years, this was at the level of intuition and intuitive policy making, but by 2006, the time had come to think about measurement. And so there was pilot testing and initial national test in 2008, and the launch of the first official GNH index in 2010. And it's been updated ever since, the most recent being 2022. It has 9 domains. It includes health, education, and living standards, like the HDI. It includes environment, so important for our times, governance, as Bhutan became a democracy, and time use, because time is also a budget, and we are also time poor. But then, perhaps stepping a little bit towards the Catholic social teachings, it includes community and culture, which includes the religious festivals and liturgies, and psychological well-being, which includes spirituality, as well as positive and negative emotions and satisfaction with quality of life. Each of these 9 domains are measured by between 2 and 4 indicators, for a total of 33 indicators. For example, in psychological well-being, there is positive emotions like joy and generosity. There's negative emotions like anger, frustration, and sorrow. There's satisfaction with your quality of life in the material sense. And then there's spirituality, which is very difficult to measure. But they measure it by how spiritual do you consider yourself to be, combined with how often do you meditate, how often do you consider judgment. For them it would be karma, for us it would be judgment, God's judgment or sins, do an examination, a confession. And these are brought together into their indicator of spirituality. And for each indicator, there's a cutoff of what is a sufficient cause and condition of well-being. In the Buddhist idea, like what Stefano said, the last mile is up to the person. The best policy can do, the best other people can do, is offer each of us the causes and conditions, but we have to make the final step. And there's a cutoff. So like a poverty measure, there's a deprivation score created for each person of the 33 indicators and their weighted components. And for public policy terms, they use a cutoff of 6 out of 9 dimensions. Again, saying this is not saying whether you are happy or I am happy, but it's saying, do we have the causes and conditions given our diversity of vocations and values? And so that gives it the ability to make a head count ratio, happy, not yet happy. And most recently, 48.1% were happy. They go within this to distinguish 4 gradients using different cutoffs, with 9% of people being deeply happy, 77% or above, and 6.4% being unhappy, less than half of the weighted indicators or dimensions. And so the GNH index is 1 minus MPI. And basically, if you are happy, if you have 67% or more, then you're saturated. More doesn't make it better. So there's something of saturation, of satiation, a recognition that more is not always better. But for the not yet happy, more always monotonically will improve the GNH index. And this work obviously was complemented by qualitative work, which also looked at the particular challenges. For example, a woman was frustrated because the boar and the deer were eating her crop. And that was a difficulty for her. So many qualitative things are needed, and participatory work is needed to come up with the structure and to validate it and to criticize it and see its shortcomings. What would happen, and these are the closing minutes, if this was used for an integral human development index? One is that you could see at a glance what had changed. For example, in the most recent update, all of the material living standard indicators improved most significantly. And positive emotions improved. Last time, from 2010 to 2015, they had not improved, they had decreased. But negative emotions increased. Spirituality went down. There was no change in life satisfaction. The number of healthy days went down because this was during the pandemic, but disability increased significantly. So you can see the mixed picture of a society. And you can then think, well, if we only looked at material, or if we ignored psychological well-being from our measure, we would not see the deterioration of spirituality. Now it's its second period of deteriorating. Since 2010 to 2022, spirituality has been going down. Negative emotions have been negative emotions have been increasing, getting worse. So there are problems in that sphere of life. And so you can have a more balanced overview at a snapshot of your society. And it's not that it offers answers, but it offers a space for discussion. And discussion not just of what the government can do, but what other institutions, ranging from church to social organizations to individuals, can do. And to businesses. So I should say that in addition to including G&H in the 12-year plans in the allocation of decisions, they have a screening tool where the policies of Bhutan are screened to see if they will improve G&H or not. But for the businesses in Bhutan, there's G&H certification, which is wider. It looks at the pollution of the businesses. It looks at the labor conditions of the employees. It looks at whether the products the businesses create will contribute to G&H or not. And so there's a whole suite of different measures beyond the individual. But there's also a recognition of the individual value. The closing book that I have, because it might be interesting if G&H measures were used also at the parochial level or the individual level, is a book by Donna Thompson, where she applied that to her own family. Her husband, Nick, who is the ambassador of Canada to the UK, her son, who had cerebral palsy, and her daughter. And they each came up with the categories of well-being that mattered to them, including spiritual states and inner peace, play and fun, meaningful work, beauty, creativity, community, friendship, as well as the more economic ones and health ones. And then they each ranked their life, and they used this as a family to talk each year about how that year had gone for them. And they got into a habit of having this being a conversation piece as a family that took them beyond where they might get to with normal conversations, but also helped them to think together about some of their common decisions of where to move, what jobs to take. So the question would be whether integral human development could think of counting-based measures. They're not available at a global level right now. We've just had a data conference on that topic in February. But they are possible for smaller studies using national data sets or participatory mixed method data sets or personal and parochial explorations. And these, in a sense, could be demonstration effects towards a global measure, and they're feasible at the level of a thesis. You can analyze a data set. You can do a small 15-person, 20-person parochial study. And I think this could push out the envelope a bit more. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, all the speakers. I would like to invite you now to the table to have our discussion. If you could take the seats here, and the table wait for Father Barrera. So thank you for those inspiring presentations. You gave us a lot of inspiration when it comes to the reasons why we should measure what we can measure, how we can approach, what framework are available to approach this challenge of measuring Catholic social teaching or integral human flourishing. That's another question. Or you've also tell us of different ways how to approach the measurements, right? What are different ways of measuring? I would like to first give a floor to our audience. Should you have any question, please raise your hand. We have the microphone. Thank you. We might wait also for Father Barrera, but...
So first of all, thank you so much for what you shared today. And my question has to do with the quote that Dr. Sabina shared of Juan Manuel Santos, in which he said that the fight against poverty is not just a technical issue, but one of leadership. And so I'm wondering, what would be ways to measure the influence of one person's leadership in public arena? And I guess that for presidents, this is easy because you can compare the numbers at the beginning, at the end of their term. But I'm thinking of figures like Martin Luther King or Mother Teresa. And I'm going to read the book of Juan Manuel Santos, but I'm interested in knowing if you have any insights that you could share. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So I think it's important to recognize that in the SDG era, metrics are performance indicators. So in the case of Mexico, which was the first country to release an official national statistic that was a multidimensional poverty measure in 2009, the head of CONAVAL, Gonzalo Hernández Licona, went to the different states personally to explain the metric to them. And the effect was a bit of a surprise in that when the next election came, the governors recognized that they couldn't win the election if they hadn't made an impact on poverty. And so then they started coming to CONAVAL saying, what do I do? And recognizing that it was a performance indicator. In the state of Oaxaca, they had the biggest reduction, and they certainly profiled that greatly because it's quite a poor state in Mexico. We've observed the need for leadership, and obviously we want people to work on poverty because they care, because they love the poor, because they've taken the option for the poor out of solidarity, whatever. But we also recognize that incentives for professional performance, where they'll get reelected or where they'll get a higher office, are part of the equation. We have a network now of 63 countries. Mauritania just joined last week. And this is a peer network of ministers, heads of state, vice presidents. And what's useful is they encourage each other, because many people went into politics with a heart for the poor, and then the reality struck them and they thought they had been naive and idealistic. But when they find people like Juan Manuel Santos, like Tsereng Tobgay, the current Prime Minister of Bhutan, then like Ana Elena Chacon or Luis Guillermo, who were the president and vice president of Panama, of Costa Rica, then they realize actually people can be grown-ups in political power and still do amazing work for the poor. And so I think that's useful. When it comes to people in civil society organizations, I can give a technical answer. So let's say that there are two types of influence. One would be the institutions, for example, of the missionaries of charity, and the other would be the influence. So influence, I don't know how to measure, but there are people who work on that. But if there are, for example, the missionaries of charity, and they have the orphanages, and they have the houses for the dying, and you can measure those services, and they link to indicators in a multidimensional measure, you can actually, that's sort of census individual data, but when the poverty metrics come out, You can look at the percentage of the population. You make some assumptions about whether or not they are poor, whether or not they had well-being. And then it's almost an accounting device. You know, RCTs are basically difference in difference, it's subtraction. And this is similarly mathematically simple. When you've set it up correctly, then you can say the missionaries of charity were responsible for this percentage of the reduction of poverty in these areas. And so there is a measurement approach that can be done. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you so much. I don't know who is going to answer my question, but it's going to be for three of you, or whoever feels that to answer, you can answer. My question is that I heard about the metrics and then the measurements that we can use to measure the implementation of the STC, I think. CST, or the social doctrine of the church. But my question is that we have already standard or principles that the church is putting so that we have to arrive into this level, that those principles, everything. But the measurement that we are going to take, is it going to be equal to each country, to each culture, to each society? Because everyone has their own way of explaining things. So can we have the same with the principles that we have, a standard principles that we have the social doctrine of the church, but can we have the measurements in the same way that the standard measurements to each country, to each society, to each culture? Because when the professor, I didn't get your last name, but professor, when he was putting the happiness measurement, I was thinking about the saying that unless the leon starts to write his history, it's only we are going to read about the hunter's history. So what about the other culture? What about the other society? What about the other people who feel that they are happy, but they are not into this kind of criteria? So I don't know if you get the point, that if we can have a standard measurements, standard criteria to measure the happiness, the implementation of the social doctrine of the church, everything. So otherwise we have to find also a strategy also to address those issues. So I don't know who of you is going to answer for this one, but it's going to be, or from the public also, from the audience. Thank you very much.
I was suggested by Father Albino to read Gaudium et Spes. Okay, Gaudium et Spes basically say that we should also learn from best practice, also from other countries. So it's very, very empirical. And it is written somewhere, and Father Albino knows better than I do, that there are some countries which are not at the top of GDP per capita, which are happy more than others. So this is basically the answer that I provide you, is that behind indicator, behind measurement framework, there are also theory and there are also cultural differences. So the happiness indicator is measuring the number of ice cream that you put on your stomach, because it basically reflects the American culture. Okay, I think that this is a great suggestion for us, also for Albino, that happiness, a part of the happiness, it depends, especially it depends on the country. On the other side, on the culture of the country, that's why I don't like the happiness indicator to have the richest country on the top. According to the Gaudium et Spes, we should have Brazil at the top, because people is there, it's not that great, but they are happy more than we are in Italy. Then they have, and also they have other problems like we have in Italy. So I think that looking at the number, so my approach is very empirical. I don't like the happiness indicator because it's too much correlated with GDP per capita, it's too much correlated with money, it's too much correlated with material pleasure. So we need an adjustment, not only conceptual adjustment, but also cultural adjustment. What is permanent is the nature of the human being. So I think that we should also go for the deprivation which are connecting with the wealth of people. So if you are very rich, you are alone, and this is deprivation. Those are the new measures.
I agree with all of that. I would just give the example of poverty measures. So the World Bank releases a $2 and 15-day poverty measure, a $3.60, a $10 a day measure for every country. And they try to make it as comparable. And we, as I showed, do one for 110 countries, as comparable as we can across the countries. But in Serbia, at 0%, and people in Serbia would say we have poverty by our standards, right? And Ethiopia would say those are not our standards. And so the national poverty measures that I mentioned, every country has an official national monetary poverty, and very few are the same as the World Bank's poverty measure. And as I mentioned, 41 countries have an official multidimensional poverty measure. In Colombia, it has 5 dimensions and 15 indicators. In Mexico, it has 7 dimensions and 7 indicators. In Costa Rica, in Afghanistan, 5 dimensions, 19 indicators. In Nigeria, everyone is different. And it's shaped according to their own. Some have employment, some have violence, some have different standards or different definitions of the indicators. And having both is useful. Because on one hand, you want to compare yourself across countries, place yourself on the global map. But then when you want to improve well-being, you need to do it within the culture. And it has to have credibility to the grandmother on the street. And she has to, my co-author, very influential economist James Foster, says it has to pass the smell test. It smells like well-being to many people. And statistics have to have that kind of public legitimacy. So GDP is consistent across countries, but it may be that for measures of integral human development, we would need to explore some that are comparable, or one that's comparable and one that's tailored to the context.
I'd like to build on your question and ask Professor Alkire, how do you manage for MPI and make, in terms of her excellent point that context makes a big difference, and then how do you make them in terms of comparing across countries for the MPI?
So what I call the global MPI, we compute in OPI. Our do files, if anybody uses Stata, our do files are online. We've developed computer programs, and we do it for the world. And as of this year, the World Development Indicators of the World Bank have it as as a reported statistic. So it's normal, and it's not contextual. So it doesn't reflect Mexico, where it's less than 2% or something, where the national measure is nearly half the population. And then for the national measures, mostly they're participatory exercises and national consultations across ministries with academics, with private sector, with civil society groups to have a framework that can be used nationally. And so they're reported. And in the SDGs, actually, they don't use the global MPI, they just use national measures. And you cannot compare Mexico to South Africa or to Bhutan. Every South Asia country has it, most of Latin America. But you can't compare any countries. So we do both. Okay. Yeah.
So I'd like to mention this initiative of Forum Francis Index, the Pope Francis Global Poverty Index that University of Forum prepared, inspired by the call of Pope to have a measure of poverty and well-being. They composed this index out of what available data of different institutions, and my question is, what kind of approach you would recommend to start with when it comes to measuring Catholic social teaching? What is the title of our meeting today? Would you try to think of maybe a different framework or specify what we mean when we talk about measuring Catholic social teaching, whether we would like to measure exact Catholic social teaching expressed by the principles, we had this example of today, or maybe integrated human development, integral human development, or maybe common good, which is also a set of conditions that allow human flourishing, achieve human flourishing different way. What kind of approach you would recommend, or would you start rather with maybe measuring the implementation of single principles, or at least some parts of what church teaches when it comes to social life, and then how to include also all the spiritual dimension if Catholic social teaching is in the service of evangelization, of how we can include, or should we include, to what extent should we include also this, the bigger picture, what it's then difficult maybe to measure. So I know who would like to start.
Okay, basically, Sister Helen sent me a PowerPoint possibly 1 year ago to hear from me what I thought about this index. Okay, the same one. I know that was a tricky question, because I would say, you know, we are from official statistics. This is just scrap from university of somewhere. And I said, I replied to her in that way. You know, in terms of process, it is a good indicator, because basically that indicator identify a goal, and then identify the data, and the data are of good quality, and process the data. So in my professional opinion, it was good. And the other part of the answer was more face-to-face, is not brave enough. So my idea is that is adjusting a bit the situation, so it is halfway there, like John Bon Jovi, but it's not 100% there. Is a smart application on what we can do, but I think that should be more Father Albino oriented, so set the stage to a very higher level, which is making social teaching more challenging, because the starting of that indicator was like picking up a sentence from the Holy Father, and it was a bit of text mining, you know, how many times the Pope said, so it was like the key word from Pope Francis. I know that Pope Francis is relevant for the church, but we have a body of knowledge. So it was experimental, it was very interesting to say Pope Francis is in his sentences is, you know, frequently using those keywords. Are those keywords measurable? Yes. How can we synthesize that composite indicator? It was right, but I think that it should be more, we should work more on the conceptual framework, building all the old body of knowledge from the social doctrine of the church. And just the last sentence is that, in my understanding, but then Father Albino can say anything, is the Catholic social thinking is multidimensional. So I will not focus, so the human being is multidimensional, so the measure should be multidimensional. I will not collapse Catholic social thinking in one specific dimension just because it is easier to measure. I will keep the old picture.
I mean, as an academic, I like to play. And so my approach would be to empirically create different measures and critically analyze them, and, you know, kick the tires and see which ones actually seem like they are both rigorous and useful. But as I was mentioning, in terms of off-the-peg composite indices, there are some that, like the SAGE, solidarity and agency, and those are words that, you know, have a resonance with the Catholic social teaching, and it might be good to look at them and to say, well, are they actually good? Can we take them off the peg? Or how would we improve them to make them better? What would we add? What would we subtract? How would we change them? And then a second step would be to say, well, in terms of composite measures, could we do better? Could we bring in some data that cover indicators or dimensions that are missing? Could we align the indicator and the dimensional structure with dimensions of integral human ecology or integral human flourishing? And then, as I mentioned, for counting-based measures, there are many data sets that have, it's imperfect, we all know it's imperfect, but that would be rich, whether they are in Europe or whether they are in Ethiopia or Bangladesh, where we could really try to do some more experimental measures, and then again look at them and criticize them and complement them with qualitative data, with consultations with policy actors in government, outside government, in the church, to see what resonates, and cognitive or qualitative interviews with people who, to develop them and have them say, does this reflect your life or not? So those are some areas. I've been speaking, and the composite measures are looking at the level of the person. But for example, Jesuit Social Services in Australia collects data at the lowest level of enumeration in the census. And it compiles it every 5 years. And so they have very, very localized data, but it's not at the individual level. It's for locations-based. And that data set is another one you could use. And you could think of, different local levels, if you're thinking of subsidiarity, where you could play with data and have data that would be informative and interesting. So I guess my approach would be right now to let several, not all, but to let a few flowers bloom, interact with others, other measures, seek to improve other measures, seek to make one's own, and then share. The last thing I'd say is that working on the formal side in mathematics and in axiomatic measurement, which is the mathematical structure of the measures, this is very much, and the people who do this know it, when you have a moral principle, then we hear it mathematically as a mathematical principle. But if a measure reflects a mathematical principle every single time, 100% of the time, you have confidence it does. And so it would be interesting, again, to have a discussion across disciplines to explain the principles that different measures respect and don't respect, and then to see how those might cohere, because those are embedded in metrics.
Thank you for interesting thoughts. While I was listening to these presentations, I remembered one note from Father Albino in his lecture. He was talking about the students of economy, that sometimes when they learn some theoretical models of, for example, of describing society, these theoretical models that are imperfect becomes for them normative. So I am wondering if whether the creation of a new way how we can measure the well-being of society, if we include in this new measurement more these principles of Catholic social teaching, maybe it's not only the solving of some practical issue, how can we know in which direction are we going, but if we create such measurement, maybe it itself can become kind of tool how to change the society. You know, from theoretical measurement to normative to normative one. So maybe my question would be: would you agree that this creation of such a measurement could have also some, let's say, broadly evangelizational impact on society?
Yes, but you also need leadership. You need a leader that say, okay, that's what I want to do. So at the end of the day, it is a moral choice. Just to give you an example, the politician, they look at the political pool, and somehow a political pool is like a market share. No, they want to increase their market share and their popularity. So political pool are useful for them to adjust. But what is negative is that most of the time they speak with the guy doing the poll, how can I improve my share? So this means that they have no value. They say, if I'm more aggressive, I will have a better share. So that game is destroying the society, because are the politicians better than the people? Are the people better than the politicians? It's not a very interesting question in my understanding. So if you have the data and you have the value, you put them together and you have the leadership, which is quantitative informed leadership, is very powerful.
And I would just complement it with two examples. One is from a poverty measure perspective. Angus Deaton, Nobel Prize in Economics, would say you want to put up a poverty measure, but you also want to think who has the authority to change it 10 years later, because it becomes normative, but after a while it becomes irrelevant. And so you have to think of the political structure to update it every 10 years. What that means is that you know it's imperfect when you launch it, but it's the best you can do at that time. But then you collect all of the criticisms, and 10 years later you say, we're going to make it better. And so that's one response. The other is incentives to create change. I'll give two examples from Bhutan. You saw that psychological well-being went down. Joy, generosity went down. Negative emotions increased. But you saw that in the second phase, positive emotions increased. So after the phase 2010 to 2015, where the positive emotions went down, there was a big discussion about that. And they decided to work on search inside yourself, on emotional intelligence. They put a program so every civil servant learned about emotions. They put it in their leadership training programs. They put some mindfulness stuff in schools. And so there was a concrete policy response to say that next time we want it to go up. And you can see it did. And during the COVID pandemic, on television was mental health. Adverts was what do you do if you are experiencing these difficulties. So I think that gave, I don't know if it gave an incentive, but it certainly captured the change. But you could also see the change was imbalanced because frustration and anger and sorrow had increased. So it wasn't yet enough. So now there are conversations of what next, what were we overlooking? But you could see a policy change. I could give another example, but I don't want to take too long. But you do see that with individual indicators. The other one is Driglum Namja, which for them is an ethic of courtesy. But you could think of any other virtues. You could think of a virtue of, I don't know, some virtue that you wanted to put in. But they saw that Driglum Namja was decreasing and that it wasn't as important to the younger generation or at present. And so then they came up with ways. They said, well, actually, this is part of our identity, is to be gentle, to be respectful, to recognize the reciprocity is core to our understanding. So they put in things to try to strengthen values education in schools about that, etc. So I think that there are possibilities, which is where I see the excitement of having a value measure and where I see that there is a demand, but sometimes an inarticulate demand that would be afraid of Catholic social teaching until they saw some of the practical things which would really resonate, I think, with what people want.
Question if nobody else has. Yes. This is for Professor Alkire. If you're free to talk about it, in terms of the use of AI for the design or the mathematics and coming up with new measures, is there room for AI to help you in your work in terms of the MPI design and
So I'm a student of AI, and what I've decided is that each month I take 3 new tools, because they keep coming up, these research tools for AI, and I play with them. I also tested them for my students on the exam questions, and they got the answers wrong, thank heavens. So I could tell the students, I know the mistakes AI, ChatGPT, whatever is making at the moment. It gets relative and absolute poverty completely wrong. Just as, I don't know why, but something's wrong on the internet. So we play with it. We play with big data. We play with merged data. The problem with what we do on poverty, which is most of our work, is it goes inside the house and it looks at who's undernourished, who isn't going to school, where the house leaks, who's unemployed. And AI can't do that yet. It doesn't have access to the individual microdata. It is not able to merge administrative data at the individual level. And so we've tried to predict our response. Everybody wants us to impute and to nowcast our measures. And so we've tried the predictive models, we've tried multiple imputation, we've tried AI, machine learning, and so far we simply cannot predict how deprivations happen within the household and how they change over time, which is interesting because you can use growth and you can do economic predictions of monetary poverty quite rigorously with machine learning, much better than we could do earlier with the models we used. But right now we're not there. And I think it is because the people who do these big data say because particular things like nutrition are not necessarily in some country contexts, surprisingly, as highly associated or as predictably associated with other aspects of poverty. And we always look at the joint distribution, and we do, at the country level, we do assessments of the overlaps between every pair and every triplet and every quartet of indicators. And what we see is the patterns diverge a lot, and particularly in less poor contexts. The bundles of deprivation that come together are quite diverse. And so right now AI can't predict that. Maybe it will, but I think it would need access to data that are right now anonymized or offline in terms of, so in Colombia they merged health records data, institutions data on basic health clinics, etc., with MPI data taken from the census. And if AI could get on top of that, it could work. But usually for very good reasons, those are behind a firewall.
If not, I would like to again thank you for your presentations, for this wide-ranging conversation, for sharing with us your ideas, your experience. Thank you to the audience for joining us. And at 6, there is another event with Professor Barrera. If you still have time and strength, and I'm sure you have, you are all welcome to continue being inspired and nourished still. Thank you again to all the speakers, and have a nice evening. Thank you.
Just a word as well. Professor Alkire had to postpone her flight departure to be able to make this, and she has been so generous because she is going to arrive in London at midnight. So she's been so generous in being with us today. So thank you very much.